Hey everybody, this is Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. In today's episode, we are going to be talking once again about compulsory heterosexuality. This time, I want to talk to you about specific lies that compulsory heterosexuality has taught us. Before we get started, I'd love for you to go ahead and subscribe, hit the like so that I know that you liked it. Feel free to share or to comment in any way that you want to. Compulsory heterosexuality, which I have another video about that and really encourage you to watch it as an introduction to this idea. Compulsory heterosexuality, Comphet, is the concept that as a society we expect and also breed into people the expectation that we are all heterosexual and we will engage in relationships with and marry and procreate with someone of the opposite sex as assigned at their birth. It's not actually that new of a concept. It has been around for a long time. It's gained popularity in its understanding as we as a society have moved to the point where we understand that not everyone is heterosexual. Much like internalized homophobia, compulsory heterosexuality hits where you don't necessarily expect it. In my observations and the time that I've been spending with people in the community, in my own life, understanding my role in my relationships, I think it's really important that we just sort of specify and maybe start to untangle a couple of the lies that have been told to us because of the expectation that we are all heterosexual. Lie number one is procreation and marriage. I want to start out with the probably obvious one, that we are raised from the get-go for the expectation that we will get married and that we will have children. This is, in religious circles as well as non-religious circles, the expectation that your purpose in life is to grow up and make money, have children, and get married and further the ideal of society that we have been living under for so many years. When people who are heterosexual choose to be single, they are looked at oddly, much less people who get married in heterosexual relationships and don't have kids. So if you look at the queer community, that does in general tend to buck the system as far as the expectation of relationships. It can be seen as an outlier in the understanding of how relationships work. If you look at the way we're structured government-wise, there's tax breaks for being married. There's benefits in insurance to having somebody that you are stable in a relationship legally recognized with, right? It's only been recently that insurance companies, health insurance companies, would allow domestic partnerships to be able to be on each other's insurance. Our society as a whole is built in the structure that everyone benefits when you get married and have children and continue our society. So those who are outside of it are made to feel like outsiders in a lot of ways. And we have made strides in the last couple of years for people who are in long-term relationships, but not necessarily legally married. They do get some benefits, and we're recognizing that's not the way everything works. But by and large, our society is still sort of shaped that way, that everybody's going to get married and everyone's going to have kids, and this is what we do with our lives. Number two is that people cannot have friendships with other people if they are attracted to them. And so this is a little bit of a weird one, right? Because when we see a little girl who's playing with a little boy, we're like, oh, they're boyfriend and girlfriend. How cute. We see a little girl who's playing with a little girl, we're like, they're best friends. We sexualize the friendships of things that are not sexual and make platonic friendships that we do not recognize society-wise as likely to be sexual at some point. That then when somebody understands themselves to be part of the LGBTQIA plus community, that idea that you can't just be friends with those you're attracted to becomes an issue, because then she is in a situation where she feels like she can't be friends platonically with other women. And it gets very confusing. It gets very mixed up. Do I like this person? Do I just like to be around this person? Am I attracted to this person? Do I feel a close friendship with this person? And it gets very confusing because we are taught from the earliest memory that we have that you cannot be just friends with someone you are attracted to. Again, this is something that goes into religious communities and everything too. I know for me growing up in a church, I had a close friendship with a guy who also had a girlfriend. We were all in a church setting together. I was seen as this like home wrecker for being friends with him. There was nothing between us. I was dating a woman at the time. Now the people in the church didn't know that, but I was this terrible person because there was a committed relationship and there was me, and single is evil. So obviously I'm the bad one. And y'all, we were in high school. But the understanding is that you cannot be just friends with someone you're supposed to be attracted to. Again, the reason that's a problem in the queer community is because you gather that assumption and that understanding that you were raised with, society-wise, in your family, in the structures you were in, and you apply that then to where your attraction lies. Where is the line between friendship and romance? And where do we really need to be drawing it in order to be appropriate in our friendships and our romances? These are questions that are not outlined if you are not heterosexual. Friendships, really intimate, zero sexual attraction friendships, can happen between two people of the same gender expression. There just doesn't have to be attraction there. But we get that mixed up and we get that confused and convoluted. And then we see all of these people who really are missing out on genuine, life-giving friendships because they're worried about how it comes off to the other person. And they're not having the conversations because they're not taught how to have those conversations. And then we're all confused and very lonely. This next one is one that I will do an individual video on also because it is needed and highly requested. Introductory wise, this next one is that you have sexual attraction in general. The understanding, compulsory heterosexuality hands us this understanding that you see someone, you feel an attraction, you meet them, you suss out the attraction, and then you do whatever order of things there is for you to do. Used to be, you meet, you date, you get married, you have sex, have kids, right? That's not the order that compulsory heterosexuality expects for us anymore, but it does have an order where the attraction comes before the relationship builds. That is the understanding. And that is part of compulsory heterosexuality. And I need you to understand this because people who identify as demisexual, aromantic, asexual, people who identify in these ways don't fit into that narrative. And that can be really distressful. When you don't fit into society's narrative as a whole, you are going to have a significant amount of distress. What we hear is nothing but these stories about meeting someone and seeing them for the first time and feeling a spark or feeling an attraction. Then when we don't, you feel like there's something wrong because compulsory heterosexuality has taught us that if you're supposed to be together, if there's something there, you'll feel it from the beginning. That's just not how it works for everybody. It definitely does not work the majority of the time people who are demi, aro, or ace. The last one that I want to talk about is the one that I think gets the most confusing in general and gets maybe joked about the most often within the community, and that is that there needs to be, no matter who's in the relationship, there needs to be a masculine presence and a feminine presence in each relationship. How many times have you seen two women who talk about how they're asked all the time, who's the man and who's the woman? They're like, there is no man. That's the point. It's become such a catchphrase, specifically within the women-loving women communities. But in general, that expectation is put across the board. For most heterosexual people, they will approach a relationship and assume that someone is more masculine and someone is more feminine. The problem is this is that weird intersection between internalized homophobia and compulsory heterosexuality and misunderstanding of our own identities and the ways that they work for us, because there doesn't need to be someone who's more presenting masculine and more presenting feminine. Is there sometimes? Sure. Does it have to be? No. It gets very confusing, and I hear this be confusing for people in that I identify in this way and I don't tend to be attracted to people who identify the same as me, but then there's other person who I am attracted to, and what does that mean for me? And how do you know if you're actually attracted to someone or if you're just attracted to their type or their vibe or their aesthetic? And that does tie into the whole, like, you can't be friends with someone you're attracted to thing. How do I know if I'm friends? How do I know if it's more? You know if it's more if you feel more. If you don't feel more at some point, then it's not more at that point. It gets so confusing. It's exhausting sometimes. When you're part of a community that is not the majority, when you're part of a group of people who is underrepresented in the media, not understood by the majority, relegated to corners of society and brought out as tokens, it is harder to understand where some of your processes come from and where they go than it is for people that is not the truth for. Specifically, that applies to the LGBTQIA plus community in the understanding that we still have a drive to fit into this compulsory heterosexual society. It becomes very difficult when we put that expectation on a couple that one of them should be more presenting feminine, one of them should be more presenting masculine. It doesn't matter if we're talking about like two guys or two girls. It doesn't really matter, because the real problem here is that we are expecting someone to fulfill a role that they're not comfortable filling. And then some people just dive into that role, and the understanding of what it becomes this something they put on, and it's not authentically them, which becomes very confusing for me, because that's the exact same thing that we're doing when we expect people to act straight if they're not straight. Right? The idea that someone in the relationship has to be a top and someone has to be a bottom, or the idea that somebody has to be more manly and someone has to be more girly. These are compulsory heterosexual ideas that we need to stop clinging to if we are going to progress as a society. Specifically within the queer community, we need to stop putting those expectations on people. It's never okay, and I hope you are hearing me when I say this, it is never okay for us to put our issues with compulsory heterosexuality on other people in our community and put them in categories because of that, or assume them to not be authentic in their queerness because of our own issues with compulsory heterosexuality and internalized homophobia. All of these things that I have listed are things that we have to sort through and let go of in order to live our fullest lives. That deconstruction is hard, and it is very seldom talked about in an authentic way. I know for me, the experience of compulsory heterosexuality has made it so that I have to then question things that I thought were instinctual or just normal for me. Is this me as raised by society, or is this me just in general who I am, without the whole idea of compulsory heterosexuality? I do want to say that for those of you out there who do not agree that compulsory heterosexuality is a thing, I want to suggest to you that maybe you rethink that. And I know that I'm going to get some of those comments, whether you post them and I delete them, or you message me privately because you're somebody that I know and you decide that it's really important that I understand how wrong I am about the things that I'm saying. I would remind you about the ways that you react when you see queer couples on television, especially, God forbid, as the main couple in a show or movie that you're watching, or the idea you had when a certain channel started making queer holiday movies. The assumption of the compulsory heterosexual attitude of our nation in general, that if we show these things to people, then they're going to become queer, means that you understand that what we show to people is what they're going to believe is possible. You can't have both. You can't argue that we shouldn't be teaching people about same-sex couples, or we shouldn't be teaching people about the queer community in general, or history of it, or having, God forbid, health class in high schools talk about safe sex across the board and not just between a guy and a girl. Okay? The idea behind not doing that is because we don't want to give people the idea that they're allowed to do it. That's what it boils down to. So you can't tell me that compulsory heterosexuality is not something that is real, because you're already recognizing that familiarity breeds acceptance. So the over familiarity of something has you afraid that society is going to change, and all of a sudden you might not be in the majority. Well, that's it for today. If any of these things have spoken to you, I hope that you will comment below and share with me which one of these has been the hardest for you or people around you to work through. Any of these you want to hear more on, feel free to message me or contact me. I hope that you have a great week, and I will see you next week for another Ask a Therapist video. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other.